Hi guys, welcome back to Scraps and Stories. I am your host Samira Wase, and today's episode, as always, is very interesting. So we have another doctor on the podcast, and today's doctor is Dr. Ian Perera. Dr. Ian has been one of my teachers, one of my doctors here in medical school. The first time I had him for classes was when I think I was in second year of medical school, and I remember it was during COVID, so everyone was wearing a mask, and I remember thinking, the first time I saw him, I remember thinking, oh, is this Dr. Polish or he's an international doctor? I was very curious. And I asked one of my friends, and he's like, oh, he's an international doctor, and he also did like the English division. That was the first time for me, like he was in the English division, because in Poland there's usually, in medical schools, there's usually the Polish division where the students are studying in Polish, and there's the English division where students are studying in English. So which is what most international people study in. They study English. So I was like, what? He was in the English division and he's here? Because that was the first time I was seeing a doctor who has stayed, an international doctor who has stayed in Poland. Because a lot of internationals, when they finish med school, they usually opt for other options outside of Poland, because probably they don't speak Polish fluently, so they can't really work as doctors here, or they're trying to find other way, or like I said in the podcast, we just don't have that much information about how to stay here, because it's somehow it looks complicated. So I was very surprised and impressed. I was like, wow, this doctor has stayed in Poland. I wonder what his story is. What made him stay here? How was that process for him? Like, does he know Polish? Does he speak Polish? But because our classes were in English, so I didn't really get to see or know if he speaks Polish. So fast forward to sixth year, I had other classes with him, and this time I was seeing him I was at his work, we were having ward rounds, we were having rotations with him, so I could see how he's working, and he was speaking Polish fluently, and he had integrated so well into the community, and I was so impressed. I'm like, not a lot of doctors do this. I wonder what his story is. So here he is. He came on the podcast and told us about his story, a bit about his background. It was such an amazing podcast, and I really, really enjoyed it. So for those who want to stay in Poland, considering Poland, for those who want to consider geriatrics, because that's also a very niche and unique specialty in itself, which is what he does, tune in and listen to the podcast. Dr. Ian, thank you so much for joining us on Scraps and Stories today.
Glad to be here.
Yeah. This was a highly requested interview, because I've noticed that a lot of international medical students come to Poland and they don't end up staying here. Mm-hmm. We end up trying our ways to find other places to go. And I think it's mostly because we probably don't have that much information of how to integrate ourselves here as doctors.
Okay.
But also measuring the options and finding that maybe there's better options or more easier options compared to Poland. So that's kind of the conversation that we're going to go into today. Mm-hmm. But before we get into that, I'd like to get to know you a bit more. If I was to imagine the little or younger Ian before
before all of this came into picture, before medical school, before even thinking of, pursuing your career in medicine, what would that Ian look like? What was his life look like?
So I grew up in the United Arab Emirates in Abu Dhabi. And at least when I was growing up, it was very limited in terms of opportunities you may have following completion of high school. The laws at the time was such that if you were to finish high school, then you would have to continue some sort of education or find employment. But to find employment in the Emirates, having reached the legal age of 18, you would need to have a contract and a sponsor. So for when I was growing up, my parents had moved to the Emirates to, earn some money enough so that we could build a house back home in Sri Lanka and then ideally move back. So me and my sisters, when we were growing up, we always, heard the plan like, oh, okay, just a few more years and then we'll go back, right? And my parents were in the Emirates up until last year. So.
Oh, okay. So did you grow up in Sri Lanka or you grew up in the Emirates?
In the Emirates, yeah.
Oh, okay.
So because of that, when it was coming to thinking about my future, it was a question of, okay, where do I want to study? When I graduated high school, there were universities in the United Arab Emirates that I could have attended, but it was never something that I really considered. I always had bigger plans to try and study somewhere abroad, ideally. This was a challenge because my parents weren't necessarily familiar with what that process looked like, because neither one of my parents completed university.
Okay.
So, of course, we had family and friends who would send their children abroad. So we had some idea, but it wasn't anything firsthand that we could rely on. So, when I was growing up, it was a bit abstract trying to think of a future profession because I didn't even necessarily know where I would be once I graduated high school. So my parents tried to guide me. They were like, okay, maybe becoming a doctor sounds good, despite the fact that we don't have anyone in medicine in our family.
Right.
Or like, oh, maybe a lawyer, maybe an engineer, but one of the good kinds of engineers who earns a lot of money, right?
Yeah.
So we didn't necessarily know anyone in medicine. My father was a banker, so he knew a lot of people in finance and so forth, but he was very much against going into that field because he didn't necessarily feel it offered much of a future and independence, which he felt was very important. And looking back on it now, I totally understand.
Yeah.
So they were pushing more towards medicine, and then there were a few options. Study in the UK, maybe study in North America. So ultimately, I decided to pursue studying in North America. And are you familiar with the North American education system for medicine?
Just a bit, yeah. It's 4 years undergrad and...
Exactly. So you complete an undergraduate degree and there isn't any specific pre-med program per se.
Yeah.
Okay, Canada's a little bit weird with that, but we'll get into that later. But basically, you can complete any kind of degree, even an arts degree, and still get into medicine as long as you pass those medical school entrance examinations and you have a good enough GPA and so on and so forth, right?
It doesn't matter if you did arts or sciences.
Exactly. So, I knew people in my class studying here who would complete a degree in education. And, they still had the credits, some key science courses need to be completed.
Okay.
And they passed that med school's admissions examination and, have good enough grades and so forth, and you can still pursue medicine. Right. Which is interesting. I will overall think it's a good idea because it's a pretty big decision to decide to become a doctor, right?
Yes.
And
I think a lot of people decide that later on. Like when you're still very young, you don't know.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I was very happy about the fact that I went to Canada, did an undergraduate degree, and that gave me a chance to kind of mature and have a clearer vision in terms of what I wanted for myself in the future. So following my undergrad degree, then, okay, I was convinced I wanted to do something to help people. I know it sounds very cliche.
Yeah. The typical medical student answer. Yeah.
But it was generally something I was interested in.
Yeah.
I had done some volunteer work, not medicine related. It was more like, volunteering in homeless shelters or joining Habitat for Humanity in Montreal. And I found satisfaction helping people. So medicine seemed like a logical choice to pursue. And then it was a question of, okay, where can I get in? So I applied to Canada. I didn't get into medical school in Canada. It's a competitive process, especially for international students, where there's a limited number of spots in medical schools. And there were, at least at the time when I was studying, around 12 or 13 medical schools. So once I didn't get into medicine, then it was a question of what to do next. Do you try and beef up your CV, maybe do a master's degree, and then reapply after that? And I know a few people in my situation who went that route.
Yeah.
Do you try and apply to somewhere in the States or the Caribbean where you study medicine and you get licensed to work in the U.S.?
Right.
The problem with the U.S. and the Caribbean were that the prices were significantly higher than what it would be for if I were to study medicine at the time in Canada. So then we looked into where else in the world could I potentially study medicine within 4 years instead of going through a 6-year program in English.
Right.
And ultimately it came down to Poland or China. And the reason why Poland won out is that in the schools we found in China, in order to receive your diploma, you needed to have passed a Chinese language examination, which I was like, okay.
Yeah. So before you get into a Chinese medical school, you kind of have to pass the Chinese.
To graduate, you need to get past it.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah. So that's where Poland won out. And there were 4-year medical programs in a few different cities across Poland. But ultimately, Krakow won out because when we were looking at the different options they offered, they had the exchange program with Rochester and UCLA for those rotations in the last years of medical school. And it seemed that quite a lot of graduates tended to match into the U.S. residency system. So that were definitely points in favor of the school here.
Okay. But hearing that journey, it kind of seems like you were looking for a place to kind of do medicine and then go back to the U.S. or Canada?
Yeah, so the idea was potentially to return to North America in general. Ideally Canada, but it's quite difficult to get into Canada unless you're a permanent resident or a citizen.
Yes.
And even then, as an international medical graduate, it's not that easy to get a residency spot.
Okay.
But I mean, we've had Canadian students here as well who, took a year to do an internship in Poland, and then they were able to get into residency following that. So the U.S. was definitely more for a realistic route in that case.
Okay. So now you've moved to Poland.
Yes.
You've applied. You've gotten in. You did a 4-year program, not a 6-year program. How was that journey like for you, integrating yourself in Poland?
So I had the biggest issue with integrating into Canada because the Emirates, was a Muslim country, very different culture, multicultural, definitely. So, despite the fact that you move to Canada and it's also a multicultural society, it's quite different culturally in terms of interactions, especially for young college students. A lot of it tends to involve alcohol. That was something kind of off-putting to me at the beginning, and also dealing with the weather was a big challenge. So it was quite a difficult transition, but having gone through that, moving to Poland was a lot easier, despite the fact, okay, you have a different culture as well. Language becomes a huge part of it too. But I felt those barriers were easier to overcome having undergone that initial transition from the Emirates to Canada.
Yeah.
And then studying here, of course, when I arrived here, didn't necessarily know a word of Polish.
Yeah.
And
Yes.
it was very... It was challenging, but people were very friendly and willing to help, even if they didn't necessarily speak English. It was quite easy to try and communicate, with people in shops and so forth, right?
Yeah.
And we also had those Polish classes in school, and
Yes.
I mean, for me, they were quite helpful. They got me a basis that I was able to build upon, and it, of course, was a bit difficult to try and integrate with the Polish society because we were all in our little bubble of medical students who spoke English.
Yeah.
So we weren't really interacting even with the 6-year program,
Yeah.
despite the fact that, we all speak English. We're kind of in a similar boat.
Yeah. But were you having classes with them?
No, they were separate classes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So you only had classes of the four-year program.
Yeah. So with our 30-odd people, we had our own set of classes, our own schedule, and so forth, because things were a lot more condensed compared to the 6-year program. So, and then of course a majority of people who were in that program were from North America, either the U.S. or Canada. There may be 2 or 3 other people who were outside of that, and they were Polish. So
Okay.
and of the people who were from the US and Canada, I would say about 70% of them had some Polish background, that, their parents or grandparents were Polish, or, they had been born in Poland and moved to the US or Canada.
Yeah.
So it made it a bit easier for us when it came to things like interacting with patients and so forth, because everyone had some knowledge of Polish and, was able to translate.
Okay.
And it also made it easier for me to integrate because, through them, I met their families and I got to know Polish culture a little bit better through that. So that was really nice to see.
Okay. How long did you have the Polish classes for? Was it like
For us, it was only the first 2 years.
first 2 years?
Yeah.
And do you feel like by then you kind of had a good foundation to have like a basic conversation in Polish?
A conversation, maybe not. A medical interview, yes.
Okay. Right.
Yeah, so that was a big hole where, like I can ask all these things, but then you're just like asking people about the weather. I don't know
Exactly.
what that would be like.
It's also sometimes when you are able to ask those questions, but when they respond, it's like, okay, what did they say?
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. You did the 4 years of undergrad in English. After graduating, what was that process like for you? How did you decide to now stay here in Poland?
So, yeah, in general, because it was a 4-year program, everyone tried to stick to a similar schedule like the North American students would. So after the 2nd year, do the USMLE Step 1, and after the 3rd year, do the USMLE Step 2.
Yeah.
And your 4th year, starting from the summer of 3rd year, you would be doing rotations in North America, right? To try and get letters of recommendation, to try and get some practical experience. Because the main things that mattered when applying to residency were the letter of recommendation and your USMLE score. Your grades at school had less of an impact because it's kind of hard for residency program directors to look at that and try and translate it to their programs, because there are some subjects that are taught that are not available in their programs, right?
Actually, talking about the program, I wonder how intense was it? Because if you're trying to shorten 6 years into 4 years, how intense was your program?
Well, there were some of those basic science courses that we didn't need to take because you would have that already from your undergraduate requirement.
Right.
And having completed that medical college admissions test examination, that's a standard of those basic sciences that should already be understood for you to be able to take that test. So we were able to skip maybe a lot of those first year courses that you would have.
Okay, I get that.
But either way, yeah, it was quite intense. So we were used to that kind of quite packed schedules. So having classes to around 7, 8-ish on occasion was not unusual.
Yeah.
And then the rotations were also a bit more condensed. But for most people, the main thing was, trying to get a good score on the USMLE.
Right.
And the content that was taught in some of those courses didn't necessarily correlate 100% with that. So a lot of people would have to resort to self-study by buying courses to prepare them for the USMLE, where you'd also get textbooks and tests and so forth. So a lot of it was try and do those classes in the day and come home and then study and do question banks and so forth to make sure you're as prepared as possible for those exams.
Okay, right. You just mentioned how most of your classmates were trying to do the exams, the USMLEs, to apply to the US. What about on your side? What did that look like?
So I initially was also planning on working in the States. So I did my USMLE step 1 and step 2. And then it came to a point of thinking about, okay, planning money for rotations and thinking about future work in the US. And then while I was doing rotations in Poland, I was starting to wonder about, okay, what does life in Poland look like as well? And you're right, there aren't very many resources, especially in English, to try and figure out what life is here like as a doctor.
Yeah.
So I reached out to some students who had also decided to stay in Poland and asked them what that process was like, what their perspectives were like. Because for people who don't want to go to the US, I knew a few of my classmates had decided to work in the United Kingdom, where if you have EU citizenship at that time, because this is pre-Brexit, it was relatively straightforward to get into the foundation program and work as a doctor in the UK, which wasn't necessarily something available to me as well. Because, of course, the US is quite prestigious in terms of its healthcare, but the residency is grueling. It's a lot of hours, and depending on what specialty you're going into, it's also 2 to 5 years to 6 years of intense work. And then, of course, once you become a specialist, it becomes a little bit more comfortable. Versus living in Poland, where it might not necessarily be as intense. Those residencies are a lot longer because the minimum is about 4 years, up to 6 years or so.
The minimum is 4 years in Poland?
For family medicine.
Okay.
And then, internal medicine is 5, surgery is 6. So it varies on the specialization.
Yeah.
So I was thinking about, okay, do I really want to live in the US? Is there a place for me that makes sense? And do I want to go through that whole process of moving again and trying to reintegrate and so forth?
Right.
Versus trying to stay here and make a base for myself because I'd already gotten to know some people and was feeling comfortable. So ultimately, I came to the decision that I'll stay in Poland. If I don't like it here, I can always try and apply to the US and go through that process. So once I made a decision, decided to take up some additional courses to work on my Polish and go through the process of qualifying to be able to work as a doctor in Poland.
I was kind of having this conversation with one of some of my classmates about when to start thinking about these things. A lot of us think about these decisions later on, like in 5th year or 6th year, except those who already want to go to the US, they have to think about that way earlier for them to be able to do the exams. But for a lot of us, we start making these decisions in the last few years. So for you to be able to decide and keep track of time of knowing, okay, I need to do these Polish classes because I've decided that I'm going to stay in Poland. Did you have to decide that like later on? Was that like an abrupt decision, or did you like need to make that decision earlier on so that you can prepare for it?
So I made the decision towards the end of my third year. So was it abrupt? I mean, I already had everything ready to apply to the US if I wanted to. But when it came to the end of the third year and I made the decision, then I knew, okay, I don't need to invest additional money in, rotations and so forth. And decided to focus on the language courses.
Yeah.
And then trying to understand the Polish medical system a little bit better, because that's not something we had a lot of exposure to.
Yeah.
Because naturally the doctors who were teaching us didn't think we would want to stay here and didn't expose us to that, which makes sense. So it was just, a lot of trying to figure out the language, figure out the system, and getting the appropriate documents in place as well, which was not straightforward.
Yeah. So now that you started taking Polish classes, so I can imagine in third year or fourth year, you're now taking Polish classes and also doing your studies on the side. When you finally finished fourth year, what was the integration or the process of now like integrating yourself as a doctor, a certified doctor in Poland?
So the first thing I needed to do was to apply for the medical Polish exam, which is held by the Supreme Chamber of Doctors in Warsaw. At the time, there wasn't a regular schedule as to when those exams are held. They would accept applications for the exam, and once they had enough people, then they would set an exam date. And the only way you could apply for the exam is to have your diploma, so after graduation. Once I sent in that application, it was, this tense period of time of, okay, what is this exam going to be? And you're preparing, but you never quite know when it is you can really relax, because they would only let you know 2 weeks before the exam date, like that, oh, here's the exam.
2 weeks before the exam?
Yeah.
Wow.
So I finally got my exam date around September-ish, if I remember correctly.
You graduated in June and got your...
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. And I know some of the people I was talking to had, to take that exam multiple times, because the exam consists of 4 parts. One is a listening part, one is there was a listening, there was a written portion, and then there are 2 face-to-face portions with a committee where you have an interview with the patient, and then they give you some medical documentation that you have to read, and then they're going to ask you questions about that documentation. And from what I had heard, they were very strict about things like grammar and so forth. So that was quite stressful for me. Because
is that exam in Polish?
Yeah, it's
in Polish.
It's to figure out if you know Polish, right?
Okay.
As a doctor.
It's not a medical exam.
It's a medical Polish exam.
Right. Okay.
Because if you had studied in English, because I know people who were Polish, had grown up in Poland, they had done an undergrad degree in the States and then came back and wanted to just do a 4-year program in English, and then decided they wanted to stay in Poland anyway. They still had to do that exam, so despite the fact that they're totally fluent, right?
Is that what it's now known as, the LEK exam?
That's a different examination.
Okay. So now, do you also have to take the LEK exam?
So yeah, every doctor in Poland has to take the LEK exam.
Okay. So you had already done that before you do the...
I had not. So the LEK exam is the examination to obtain your medical license.
Right.
And currently you can take that examination in your 6th year of medical school or after you graduate. When I was a student, you can only take the examination after you graduated. And they would hold the examinations twice a year, right? And it's the same now, once in the winter and once in the fall.
Right.
And the examination is relatively straightforward, where you have questions from different specializations in medicine, and then they also have some questions about medical law and ethics and so forth. So that examination I took only after the medical Polish examination. It's available in both Polish and in English, but I decided to do the Polish version because I figured if I'm studying Polish, I kind of have to know how to do examinations in Polish anyway, right?
Yeah.
So so that was something I had done later on, and that's independent on whether or not you have that the medical Polish examination.
Okay. So for the exam, if you want to work in Poland, could you still do your exam in English, or you kind of have to just do
you can
it
do
in
it in
Polish?
English.
You can do it in English?
There's no restriction on that front.
Okay, so there are two exams, the exam and the medical Polish exam. So once you pass those, you're now officially a licensed doctor in
Yes.
Poland? Okay.
Well, also you need to have passed. You have to complete an internship.
So when exactly do you do the internship? Is it before you do all these exams or after?
So in order to do the internship, you need to have a diploma, and you need to have this medical Polish exam if you've completed your training, your medical school in English. So, and the internship usually starts in October, and then there's a second wave that also starts in March. And you need to have all your documents ready by September usually to qualify for a place there. So I was a bit unlucky because my Polish exam was in September, so it was too late for me to apply for that regular October period. So I had to apply to the Ministry of Health to try and start the internship before the March recruitment period, but by the time all the documents were ready, it was already March anyway, so it didn't matter. So once you've completed that internship, which is 13 months long, and you have the and if you study in English, you have the medical Polish exam, then you're a licensed doctor.
Okay. And now you can start practicing
and then you can practice as a doctor.
I'm wondering, at that point, how good were you in Polish? Because usually that's that's where we kind of have a hard time figuring out, because you're like, okay, how good should I be in Polish to be able to actually even consider staying in Poland? So from the time you graduated medical school, how good were you in Polish?
Hard for me to say. Decent, I would say. I mean, I was nowhere near fluent, definitely. More around a B2 level,
Right.
is what I would say. But from what I understand, if you've completed a B1, it should be enough to pass that medical Polish examination. But I would find it quite difficult to work as a doctor with the B1 level of Polish.
Yeah. So I have a question for me. Say I finish medical school and I've decided it's a late decision. I've decided I want to stay in Poland. And I decide to take maybe a Polish class to try and up my Polish language. How long do you think it would take someone to actually get to a B2 level, or a level that they could be able to, work as a doctor?
I mean, it all depends on where you're starting from, right?
Yeah.
If you
the basic, the dzień dobry, przepraszam, that kind of the
that'd be
basic.
definitely challenging.
Yeah.
So you'd have to work on it quite intensively to get comfortable.
Yes.
Not only with speaking, but also writing, because documentation is a huge part of it as well, right?
Yeah.
It would be, if you were starting from January and you have until, let's say, June, July, it's feasible to get up to a B1 level, but it's going to take some hard work.
Yeah. Because Polish is not an easy language.
It wasn't straightforward for me, though.
Yeah.